Hey everyone, I'm Jean Chatsky. Thanks for joining me today on Her Money, where we talk about how personal finance and money, and today work, touches everything in our lives. And let's just put it out there and talk about ambition. We have been told it is not a dirty word, that it's actually okay, more than okay, for women to be ambitious, that we should strive for C-suite positions, the corner office, higher and higher paying roles. And while we are thrilled, actually, to see that women's representation in the C-suite is higher than it's been before, according to McKinsey's 2023 Women in the Workplace report, women are also leaving these positions at alarming rates and at a notably higher rate than men who are working at the same level. And as a result, there are simply fewer women in line for these top positions. So, what's this all about? Well, today we're going to consider the notion that our definition of ambition may be outdated because it prioritizes men and the way men work, not accounting for all of the unpaid labor that we know all too well that women do outside the workplace. Women, it turns out, don't want these leadership roles if it means giving up the ability to live their lives and prioritizing their careers to the detriment of their health and their family and their friends is proving just not okay. So maybe it's time for a new definition of ambition, one that gives us more flexibility to rise to those challenges that we want to take on, but also that allows us to do it on our own time and in our own parameters. My guest today, Jennifer Romolini, has spent her career being, as she puts it, overly ambitious. And reaching the top made her so burnt out that she ended up literally losing her voice and her job. We will get to both of those things later. She is a former top tech executive, a former chief content officer. These days, she's living a slower life. She's an award-winning podcast creator, podcast host, and writer, and her new book, Ambition Monster, has already been named one of the best new books of 2024 by Harper's Bazaar. It is a deeply personal memoir about workaholism, the addictive nature of ambition, and the humbling process of picking yourself up when the world lets you down. Jennifer, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this talk.
I am as well. So I'm going to go way back to start. You talk in the book about your childhood, about how being raised by two teenage parents where your relationship to money as a family was always changing and how that shaped you. Tell me more about that, knowing that we are a show where we talk about money all the time.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about money. I think it's something women don't talk enough about. I think we should all be talking about it more. I was raised by not only were my parents teenagers, but they were also high school dropouts and then eventually small business owners. My parents are very entrepreneurial. They had a lot of hustle. Together, they got us out of what was lower middle class, let's say, not necessarily abject poverty, but definitely lower middle class HUD house. We lived in a rough part of Philadelphia, into an upper middle class life by the time I had graduated high school. So I really saw days of scarcity. I saw work as survival. I saw my parents work constantly. My father owned a basically a series of grocery stores, fruit and produce markets. So we have perishable goods. There's trucks moving all the time. He is just never not working. And we had more money than a lot of the people in our extended family. So I really saw what work could do. And I saw work as a bit of salvation because of that. And when you come from working class roots, you have a different relationship with money and work. It's just about survival. This wasn't about like career fulfillment. This was about how do we get a roof over our head and food on our table, and then eventually how do we build into having a better life for our kids.
What did you take from that focus on work, from the fact that your father was able to do this, your parents were able to do this for your family? How did that shape the way that you entered the world of work as an adult?
I believed heartily in the American dream, which I think that it was more accessible in when my parents were building a business starting in the 70s. But I believed very much in, like I said, work as salvation and survival and a lot of scarcity, and you have to jump and you have to do everything. Like you just will do anything for success. That was really what I had seen. Don't leave money on the table. If it was there, don't leave it there. Grab it. Do whatever you can to grab it. So that was one part of my aspirations were for money and survival. But there was another thing that happened, which was I also grew up kind of rough with working class parents who were kind of rough. Their discipline was really harsh. Their expectations were really high. They didn't have many parenting tools. And I think it wasn't just about work, it was about success. I think that I wanted external success to fulfill an internal hole that sort of started in my childhood. The feeling that I was never good enough, the feeling I was a bad kid, the feeling that my productivity was tied up in my value. I think that's something a lot of working class kids get, kids of immigrants get. So productivity was a big thing in our family, and I definitely internalized that.
Yeah, I get that from the way that you sort of crafted this book, but also the way that you worked for much of your professional life. I mean, you write about the fact that you were a kind of a late bloomer professionally. You didn't land your first office job until you were 30, but that at the same time you were a 7 day a week worker, that you made yourself, and this is straight out of the book, indispensable at every company you ever worked for, in every position you ever held, at the expense of nearly everything else in your life. You were always good at your job. I get this.
Yeah.
I have felt this drive as well for most of my professional life, and unlike you, I don't have the rough roots to
Yeah.
attribute it to. I think a lot of women can relate to this feeling of wanting to be indispensable in our careers. Where do you find that it typically comes from?
I think that we are the children of the women's liberation movement, right? And the women's liberation movement says you can have everything. Now you can have whatever the men have. You can have these big careers, but you also will have this family and you will have all of the physical and, if not physical, the emotional labor of having a family, right? We added and we didn't take anything away. And I think that there was a big lie sold to us. There was this pressure too, because if we could, we should, right? If we
Right.
could reach the highest echelon of the professional ladder, we should take it, we should grab it. And it was an idea that it was a privilege, right? To be able to work and to be able to grow in a career and to have career satisfaction. We were really among the first generations to have this, right? And there's not a lot of like social safety net in this country, right? And there's not a
No.
lot of support for mothers and for women generally, right? Because we also entered these like highly combative workplaces, these high stress workplaces where we had to prove ourselves plenty. And I mean, and this is just talking about if we're white women. If we're women of color, it's even harder, right? So there's all these things. The deck is stacked against us, and we just keep going as if it's not.
And I think in part we keep going, and maybe you've felt this too, because we get some satisfaction from it, right? We keep
Yeah.
going because not only have we made ourselves invaluable, but we're being told, "Oh my God, you're so good at this. You did a great
Yes.
job. You bailed me out. You saved
Yep.
the issue. You." And I mean, that doesn't feel so bad.
No, it's a validation seeking for 100%. Like there's a validation seeking. Like let me just say, I love working. Like I really do love working. I love creating things. I'm an incredibly ambitious person. But I think that you can really misdirect your ambition. And when it becomes about external gratification, that's one way that you are totally misdirecting your ambition because nothing's going to fill that hole. And women are, let's just have a gender stereotype, we're pleasers, right?
Yes.
We're doers.
Yes.
We often are self-doubting, feel like we're bad, and we want to be told that we're good,
All the time.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the classic story of a woman looks at a job listing and a man looks at a job listing and the man doesn't have like half of the requirements. The woman doesn't have the requirements and she's like, no way, I can't get that. And the man's like, yeah, I'll take that. Right. So
Yeah.
we're just sort of just very specifically set up to fail in these environments, even when we were succeeding.
When did you realize it was a problem for you?
So I think that we chase for a long time, right? We chase and we chase and we chase. Well, it's going to be the next promotion. It's going to make, this is going to feel better when I get this much money and I get this promotion. And well, once I'm at this level with this title, and we keep going, right? And we do it with everything. Once I have a partner, once I have a child, whatever our aspirations may be, the next, the next. And at least in my industry, I had kind of reached a peak, right? There was certainly higher to go, but I was the highest title you could have. I was a chief content officer. You can't get higher than that. And I had a relatively successful book, right? So I was getting all this media attention for this book. I remember at one point, Cosmo reached out to me and they're like, we want to do a story on you. We want to get your life. And I was like, oh man, that is not something you want. So I reached this level and it was at so much cost. My marriage was really in trouble. I was for sure neglecting what was a high needs child. It wasn't totally my fault, but I couldn't be present for really very much. I was the breadwinner of the family and nothing felt good. I didn't see friends. I didn't have community. I felt so isolated. I felt exhausted. I felt hollow. And what happened somewhere in the process of that was that my body started to give out. And it started to give out. No, it had been giving out for years. I was getting really intense headaches. I had a slew of gastrointestinal issues, including like 80 stockbroker debt, like an ulcer. Like I had it all, right? I had it all, quote, right? But what happened was I was in the middle of launching a big project for a big company, and I at the same time was launching a book. And so I was talking all day long. And I was also at a point where people wanted me to give keynote speeches. So I was doing that too. And I'm standing on a stage giving a keynote speech, and my voice just goes. It's mid-word, and I can feel that I can't get the air to make sound. And it only lasts like a second. But something's wrong. I can tell there's something's wrong. And so I wound up having to have vocal cord surgery. I had really burnt out my vocal cords so much that they initially thought there were 2 polyps. I think eventually they found 6. And I had to go on complete voice rest to get this surgery for 2 weeks, or I would risk not being able to talk again. So I had to sit back and observe. It was almost like a very Buddhist thing. It was like almost like a silent meditation. I was still working. I was on calls. But I was just an observer. I wasn't a participant. And it changed my whole life because I just saw the game in a way I hadn't seen it before as an outsider. And I knew that I was done.
What were the things that you noticed in the game? I mean, what were those observations that became so crystallized?
I just was seeing how much people were making emergencies out of things that weren't emergencies, favor currying, jockeying into position, just all this sort of ugly office politics. I had to cancel several events, and I found that the people at the time, now I don't know if this is how it would be now, people at the time were not as kind as they could have been or compassionate. I just really started assessing what my place was in the world and what if I extracted myself from this world? And I didn't really give those thoughts too much mind because I was still in survival mode. I couldn't imagine walking away yet. But once I recovered from the surgery, I couldn't work in the same way. Like if I got an all slacks tirade, like all caps slack tirade at 4:55 a.m., which was a thing I got often, I just stopped responding. I just actually started living my values, and then I got fired.
Go figure, right?
I stopped going above and beyond. I stopped working like work was the only thing that mattered.
There were a number of different pressures on you, the physical, the the ones from your job, but also the financial. So
Yeah.
as the breadwinner of the family, when all of these pieces shifted, how did you cope?
I mean, we had saved up money for a house, and I said to my husband, when I got fired, I said, I'm not in any shape to get another job. And I knew we had that money. And, I say in the book that I used the money that we were going to buy a fixer-upper house to fix the fixer-upper that was my brain at the time, right? So I was lucky that I had some savings, right? I was very lucky. But I was not good with money either. And I really just never paid attention to it. I thought I was bad at it. I've since learned that I really just never considered myself valuable enough to learn about money, to take care of myself financially. Like it really was tied up in a lot of self-esteem, poor self-worth. And over the past couple of years, I've really educated myself about money. So it was, in a way, I mean, I'm not really answering your question, but in a way I was making all this money, but it was just like was going nowhere. It was like we weren't investing. I didn't understand compound interest. Like we weren't doing anything. We weren't saving for retirement. I was just throwing money at problems for years and not being responsible or organized or careful with myself and my family. And what I found when I walked away and when I started consulting and started learning about money was I could live on a lot less and still save. Like I could do a lot with not as much. And the pie chart of my life could be so much more balanced.
I want to talk about finding that new balance and what that looks like from the other side, and how you figured out which pieces, because when you talk about living your values, right, or we talk about spending our values, what we're talking about is making choices with the limited resources that we have, whether it's time or whether it's money, and giving them the appropriate weight. So as you come back into your life, getting fired, and by the way, I've been there. My 40th year, I got divorced. I lost my father. I got fired. And I turned 40, which I was not happy about.
Yeah.
Which I was not. I was so not happy about that at the time. And now I'm going to turn 60, and I'm thinking, why was I not happy about turning 40?
I know, right?
But putting the pieces of a life back together in a way that makes sense, at least more sense, it's a dance, man.
Yeah.
It is hard. So how did you figure out what fit and what had to go?
It took a long time, and I don't know. I didn't necessarily explore all of this time in the book, and that's partially because it's kind of boring. I stopped saying yes when I meant no. I stopped taking on projects that I felt, because it's a certain point in your career, if you're lucky enough, you kind of know what you're good at, and you know the kind of projects you like, and you kind of also can foresee a shit show, right?
Yes.
Like you've been around for a long time and you're like talking to somebody and you're like, oh, this sounds like a shit show. And I used to sign up for every shit show. I was just happy to have been asked. I was like, let me in on the shitty party. Fine. I really had a masochistic approach to work, which was, oh, the more broken it looks, the more value I can bring, the more I can fix it, right? It was this very toxic dynamic with my work. So I started saying no a lot because I still was kind of hot in my career, which again, all of this is really a privilege, but I was still like well known enough that people were reaching out to me they're reaching out to me for a kind of work that I didn't like, right? It also is very difficult to be good at something you don't like, right?
Yes.
But if you keep putting energy into it, that's where your path is going to go. So I had to make these very hard decisions, which were to say no to well-paying work that I didn't want to do, that I knew was going to take me away from my family that really needed me, my marriage that really needed me, and that I wanted to invest in. I wanted to invest in my family, my friends, and my relationship very, very much. So I started setting some rules around work. Well, I'm not going to work after 3 p.m. on the West Coast. That's it. That's the time. I'll put in the appropriate amount of hours, but I want to be able to pick my child up from school every day. That was one boundary, and I did not cross it. When I said no to things, I thought, oh no one's going to ask me to do anything ever again. We're going to die. Like, I don't know what's going to happen here. We're going to starve. Like, what, I make all the money. What's going to happen? And then a couple of interesting things actually did happen. My husband was like, oh, wait, I could make more money.
How nice.
Now that you're really present here and helping with the house, I can actually go out and make some more money. I can go engage in some creative projects that maybe I didn't feel like I had the bandwidth to do. And then the second thing was I started getting the kind of work I wanted. And I started seeking it out. And it took a long time. It wasn't like I pitched a narrative podcast and it just like poof, it was there the next day. And the first time I did it, it didn't pay very much money. Like, I had to accept that I was climbing back down a ladder, but I was lit up by the work. And my ambition felt like energetic and alive in the way that I had not felt when I was pushing paper and putting out corporate fires. So those are some of the things I did. And, it was really working through a lot of fear and the stories that we tell ourselves, which is we get stuck, we get fixed. And in those fixed states, there's nowhere to go. It's where burnout is born.
You've had a pretty incredible 2023, 2024. You just released this book, your podcast, Stiffed, which is fascinating look at women in the porn industry, was named one of the best podcasts of 2023 by New York Magazine. You co-host the podcast Everything is Fine with Kim France, who we just had on the show. She's my style guru.
Oh, she's amazing.
She is fantastic, and I'm happy that that it is. I'm just so happy that the story has a happy ending. Can I say it that way? I mean, I really respect the choices, and I'm so pleased that it has worked out so well.
But that's the thing; those choices are available to all of us. We just think they're not. They're available. Changing, transforming your life, finding things that light you up, it's all there for you. It's there. We just are so afraid. We're so afraid that it won't work out. And it usually always does.
For the listeners who feel like, what if I have a problem with ambition? What if I have a problem with workaholism? There's a French test called the Work Addiction Risk Test, WART, for lack of a better word. It's built around 5 dimensions: compulsive tendencies, control, impaired communication and self-absorption, inability to delegate, and low levels of self-worth. How do you know if you need to take this test? Is it kind of like your relationship with alcohol? If you think you have a problem, you do?
I mean, maybe. When your life is out of balance. I think there's an itchiness. What I wanted this book to be, what I wanted this book to feel like, and what I felt like this book was an addiction memoir. That's what I modeled it after. That's how I think it reads in that kind of like pacing, that very intense pacing. That's what I was going for. If you are itchy when you are not working, if you are shaming yourself for your lack of productivity, if you are going above and beyond work at all times, if you're not taking your vacation days, if you like, there's so many ways to start looking at this incredible imbalance in your life. If you are feeling that isolation, if you're hiding in work, you're just like, oh, well, I'll just pop on for a little while here, because you can't really sit with yourself for whatever reason it is. And especially in midlife, I mean, goddamn, there's so many reasons, right? There's the grief of the decisions you didn't make. Our relationships are a lot more complicated at this time than they were, when we were in the first blush of love in our 20s and 30s, right? If we're parents, it's really complicated because we're at this age, we're parenting older kids, and that is so much emotional labor and so difficult. And that's not even to mention aging parents, our own health, menopause, all of it, right?
Yep.
And if you are using work as a coping mechanism to get yourself through these moments, that for me was the indication that something was very off, because I was not taking care of myself. And that doesn't go away. It's like that internal poverty, external riches. That was really where I was at. So if that's where you're at, yes, I would say take the test.
Take the test, but even if you don't take the test, read the book. I could not recommend it more. Ambition Monster, Jennifer Romolini. Thank you so much. Come back anytime.
Oh my God, my pleasure. This was so much fun. Thank you. Thank you for reading the book and promoting the book. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It really spoke to me.